Here's a jaw-dropping reality. Switzerland's pharmaceutical giants are about to sit down with their own government in what could become one of the most consequential economic negotiations of the decade. This week, Swiss Economy Minister Guy Parmelin and Health Minister Elisabeth Baume-Schneider are scheduled to hold critical discussions with executives from pharmaceutical powerhouses Roche and Novartis, along with potentially other industry leaders. But here's where it gets controversial. This isn't just a friendly business chat. These meetings are happening because President Trump has essentially put Switzerland's entire economic future on the negotiating table with his aggressive 39% tariff policy. Here's what most people don't realize about this unfolding drama. While pharmaceuticals have temporarily escaped the brutal 39% tariff that recently slammed Swiss exports, like luxury watches and premium chocolate, the industry is walking on thin ice. The looming threat? A Section 232 national security investigation that could potentially unleash tariffs of up to 250% on pharmaceutical imports. Think about that number for a moment. 250%. That's not just a trade policy. That's economic warfare. The timing of these closed-door meetings is no coincidence. Results from the pharmaceutical sector review are expected within weeks, creating an atmosphere of urgent uncertainty that has Swiss officials scrambling for solutions. According to insider sources familiar with the negotiations, the discussions will likely focus on encouraging these pharmaceutical giants to dramatically increase their American investments. A move designed to shrink Switzerland's massive trade surplus with the United States and hopefully convince Trump to roll back those punishing tariffs. But here's the part that should make every consumer nervous. Trump has been aggressively pressuring pharmaceutical companies to slash drug prices in America. While that sounds great for American patients, there's a darker economic reality at play. When companies are forced to reduce prices in one major market, they typically compensate by raising prices elsewhere. Can you guess where those elsewhere markets might be? That's right, Europe, including Switzerland. This creates a fascinating and troubling paradox for Swiss health officials. The very ministry now negotiating with these companies also happens to be responsible for setting drug prices within Switzerland. If pharmaceutical companies decide to offset American price cuts by hiking European prices, Swiss patients could end up paying even more for medications. And Switzerland already has some of the highest drug prices in Europe. Let's put this situation in perspective with some staggering numbers. Pharmaceuticals represent Switzerland's most valuable export relationship with America, generating an enormous 32.75 billion Swiss francs last year alone. That single sector accounts for roughly half of all Swiss exports to the United States. The economic stakes couldn't be higher. If those devastating 39% tariffs were extended to cover pharmaceuticals, expert estimates suggest Switzerland's entire economic output could plummet by more than 1%. The root of this trade conflict lies in America's substantial 38.7 billion franc trade deficit with Switzerland, with pharmaceutical exports being the primary contributor to this imbalance. From Trump's perspective, this represents an unfair economic relationship that demands immediate correction. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Swiss pharmaceutical companies have already begun making substantial commitments to American expansion. In a move that clearly signals their desperation to avoid tariffs, Novartis announced plans in April to invest a massive $23 billion in building and expanding 10 facilities across the United States. Not to be outdone, Roche unveiled an even more ambitious commitment, $50 billion invested over the next 5 years, promising to create more than 12,000 new American jobs. But here's the million-dollar question that nobody in these boardroom meetings wants to address publicly. Are these massive investments genuine business expansion? Or are they essentially expensive protection money paid to avoid economic catastrophe? The Swiss government's chief negotiator, Helene Budliger-Artieda, recently returned from Washington with the sobering reality that tariff discussions are far from over. While the initial 39% tariff implementation has already begun impacting Swiss exports, the pharmaceutical sword of Damocles continues hanging over the entire relationship. What makes this situation particularly intriguing is how it exposes the complex interconnectedness of global healthcare economics. When one superpower decides to flex its economic muscles, the ripple effects can fundamentally alter drug pricing and availability across continents. The upcoming meetings between Swiss officials and pharmaceutical executives represent more than just damage control. They're essentially a negotiation for the future structure of international pharmaceutical trade. The outcomes could establish precedents that influence how other nations handle similar trade pressures and how global pharmaceutical companies balance pricing strategies across different markets. Here's what I find most controversial about this entire situation. Should healthcare and life-saving medications ever be used as bargaining chips in international trade disputes? While Trump's pressure for lower American drug prices might benefit American patients, the potential consequence of higher prices elsewhere raises serious ethical questions about global healthcare equity. What do you think? Is it acceptable for one country to leverage trade policy to effectively force pharmaceutical companies to shift costs to other nations' patients? Should essential medications be treated like any other commodity in trade negotiations, or do they deserve special protection from political maneuvering? Share your thoughts. This debate touches on fundamental questions about healthcare as a human right versus a market commodity.